Meeting to order. Good morning, everyone. So, welcome to my commute route to Atlanta. There was a brush fire on Fulton Street, I think it was, but we had no visibility where I was coming in. So, anyway, let's pause for a minute and pray, first of all, for the safety of people who come to the Capitol and for those who work in the Capitol. Also, Lord, please be with us today as we make decisions we hope for the benefit of the citizens of Georgia. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen. I believe our bill presenter is here. So, where's our bill presenter? Right there. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see you, Dave. Before you begin presenting, since this is our full committee, we can take resolutions up in our full committee. Do we have a sign-up sheet for anybody who wishes to speak on the bill? Okay. I want to remind y'all to sign up. And Chairman Knight, go ahead. This is me.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. I bring before you House Resolution 643 today for your consideration. This resolution seeks to recognize but also provide balance between a proposed spaceport and its impact on current hunting, fishing, scientific research, commercial interests like shrimping and fishing, as well as other interests such as property rights, private property rights, and a whole host of other issues. This resolution acknowledges that the federal government is studying this issue. I know that there are reports that are anticipated very shortly, but I also wanted to stress, and the purpose of this resolution is to stress that we as a state, and primarily us as legislators, the elected officials of this state, we have a duty to make sure that we understand all of the impacts of this project, whether good or bad, or both. My intention is not to diminish the opportunity that the space flight may enable. However, it is my belief that we should have a balanced perspective on this issue. I want to remind the committee, and I'm sure many of you were on the floor that day where when Representative Spencer had the liability bill that was up, then I got up and urged caution, okay? That's all I did. And if you'll look at my vote on that bill, it was affirmative for yes. Because in order for the space program to even get a chance, this liability waiver that we passed must be there. Okay, so I want to remind y'all, I'm not against the spaceport. But my concern as a citizen, but as a legislator, especially a chairman of my committee, is with the impact that this could have on Georgia sportsmen and women who enjoy the coast, who enjoy fishing, and quite frankly is I believe one of the most beautiful places on earth is the Georgia coast and the Isles. And you're probably going to hear, because I talked to the author of the bill, Representative Spencer, that the timing is just bad on this. I should wait until after the federal environmental impact studies are done. Well, I'd argue differently. This body passed out, and I believe it passed out of the Senate yesterday. I think the House bill passed the Senate yesterday. So it is a done deal as far as long as the governor signs that bill, that liability waiver is there. And I think that is the biggest message that the state is sending, is that, hey, we're welcome. This spaceport, this industry is welcome. We've taken a huge, major step towards saying welcome to Georgia. And as far as the timing of this what I've done, I think it's quite frankly impeccable, because we have waited until after that has cleared the legislature, and I'm introducing just a resolution that is urging caution, is urging that we make sure, we as legislators in this state, that we understand all of what is happening or could happen, the impacts that could happen to Georgia, its citizens, its private property owners, as well as those the state's interest. So I would argue very much differently. I've placed on a packet in front of you, and as I read more and more on this, obviously these studies are coming in, but one of the things that I read the other day and found was the United States Department of Interior, which was the National Park Service, regarding Cumberland Island. And again, they're at a position where they're waiting on environmental impact studies, but this document outlines a lot of questions that they have, and I think they're relevant, and I think they're things that we need to decide for ourselves as this information comes in, to make sure we understand everyone's concern, and make sure that ultimately we as the state recognize that we have a duty to make sure that we're comfortable with whatever may or may not happen. But if the spaceport does come, we need to know what are the impacts that it may have, and what is the mitigation that may have to come along with it, what are the costs, etc. A couple of the issues is as you can see in this study is, the island, the Park Service, you've got on page 2 just a couple of the items, visitor access, restriction for hunting and fishing and general recreation, closure times, time of closures, forewarning of closures. It talks about people planning vacations and events, no less, the personal property and the residents of that will be impacted that are on Cumberland Island or Little Cumberland Island. These are private property rights. I just want to make sure we understand that there's a lot of issues that we need to make sure that we're well aware of. The other thing is, and I think this is the biggest thing that I've had a concern about, and I went to Representative Spencer, not this session, but prior session, as this bill was introduced. And my concern still lies with the impact that this spaceport and the rocket launches may have on our coast, on our marshes, on the resource that all Georgians are entitled to and have access to and use. And I'll remind you, if you look in page 6 of the national report, and that's been one of my concerns is the launch, the closures, and I've asked Representative Spencer, and he's spoken with me a number of times, so I can't say he's not speaking with me, but I'm still not comfortable that we've got all the answers. But here's the Park Service says that, they asked a question, what is the statistical probability of a catastrophic failure occurring over the island or outside the park boundaries? And what impact it will have. But, that the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport, they've had 11 launches in 9 years with one catastrophic failure. Other sources say that it's 12 and 2 failures. So the statistics and the reality of these things is that there are going to be catastrophic failures. It's just part of a inherently dangerous technology. One reason we had to have the liability for the crew members is that they know it's inherently dangerous. Otherwise, that would not have been necessary for a spaceport. And just to let you understand where I'm really coming from here, and I don't know, I'm going to get my aide to make sure that we. First of all, on the map. Guys, the outer rings are approximately 1, 3, and 7 miles, 5 and 7 miles. And as you can see, the yellow pin marks approximately the spot of the launch pad. But if you can see, those are all of our marshlands right there, okay? And obviously to the east is Little Cumberland, okay, on the north end, and then Cumberland on the south end. And so typically these launches will be, going to the east over the ocean, but it must cross our marshlands and Cumberland Island and Little Cumberland Island. And, so the next slide I want to show you is just to make sure we all understand what could happen is the, that one. This is a catastrophic failure, okay? We'll skip ahead. All right.
Where is this one located?
This is on Florida. This is Cape. What is it?
Cape Canaveral.
Yeah. So, yeah, and you can see the ocean. There you go. Yeah, so you can see the marsh around it and the ocean side. There's one more I'll show you. And this is a SpaceX. These are all in recent years. I think this one is in 16. So this is no more than 7 months ago. And this is just a test. This isn't a. I'm not sure if this was Florida. It's somewhere, I think, on the. Madam Chair, I want to say it's on the Atlantic coast. I'm not sure if it's Florida, Virginia, but and this is not a launch. This is a test. Okay, as you saw earlier in the caption, this is a test. So they're not even launching it. Okay. It's sort of a dry run. Okay.
Is that considered a failure?
Well, I look, guys, and I know. And I bring this, and I know I've showed 2 catastrophic examples, but I do want the reality to be known, is that the statistics and the probability is that something will happen, okay? But I want to make sure we as a General Assembly understand those, and if the environmental things come back, and even if it says yes, that we as a General Assembly understand the risk and that there are proper measures taken to make sure that those risks may be mitigated, or what will be the ramifications. As you look in this report, and I'd urge you to read this, I mean, they're great questions. How will this affect insurance? How will this affect private property around? These are questions from a national park that is just looking at its interest here. And I'm just telling you, I don't think all the questions have been answered or have been thought all the way through the process. So with that, Madam Chair, I'm gonna go back and sum this up. I'm not against the spaceport. I voted for the bill as far as the liability. I think it's important that we as a state are always open to industry and business, and there could be great economic benefits to this. And if everything comes back and it's great, and we all understand the risk, and we understand what can and probably will happen, and those are mitigated or talked about and mitigated, then fine. The state will continue. This that's fine. But I want us as a General Assembly to understand that, one, we're not just a stakeholder. This is the state. This is our coast. These are our Golden Isles, our marshes, and we have a responsibility to all the people of Georgia, because those marshlands, what's in it, how does it affect our commercial shrimpers, crabbers? I mean, there's a whole host of things. And I'm just urging caution. That is what I'm doing, is urging caution. And again, the timing of this resolution was such that it was after we sent a message that, hey, we're not against you, but we want you. We've passed a major piece of legislation that will allow you to come into the state. But this resolution also, I think, wisely says we're going to examine and make sure that we understand all of what could happen with a spaceport, and make sure that we understand the risk and what the consequences of what could happen. That's it. That's what this resolution is about.
Thank you for your introduction. We do what we call a walkthrough our bills when we hear it for the first time. So will you just take the committee through the beginning with your whereases and your therefores?
Yes, ma'am.
We're relatively have a lot of new members on our committee, and it helps some of those older ones as well.
We'll go through it line by line, recognizing the unique economic and natural resources of the coastal Georgia and the need to carefully study and consider the impacts of a commercial spaceport may have on such resources for other purposes. I think we're making sure that the impact, that's the stress of that part. Whereas Georgia House of Representatives passed HB 1 on February 16th, 2017. I'm sorry we haven't got an opportunity to say that the Senate passed it yet. I believe it was the Senate that passed the bill yesterday.
It was the Senate and an agree on the House side.
Okay.
Final agree.
All right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but whatever it is, but the legislature has agreed, and I think this is sitting before it will be for the governor's consideration at this point. For the purposes of fostering the development of the commercial space launch industry in the state of Georgia, and whereas due to the risk associated with commercial space launches, it is anticipated that any vertical launch commercial spaceport developed in the state of Georgia will be located in coastal Georgia. And whereas the development of a commercial spaceport in coastal Georgia offers potential economic benefits to the state of Georgia. I want to make sure we stress that. I recognize, as well as this resolution recognizes, the potential economic benefits to Georgia of this proposed industry. But I go on and say, whereas the impacts of a commercial spaceport may have on Georgia's ports, its commercial fishing and shrimping industries, its recreational and tourism industries, and private property rights of Georgia citizens have not yet been studied. Whereas it is of paramount importance to understand how a commercial spaceport in coastal Georgia will impact the aforementioned economic and natural resources of the state of Georgia and the industries that depend upon them. Now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives that the members of this body recognize the need for careful study of the impacts of a commercial spaceport may have upon the aforementioned vital economic and natural resources of the state of Georgia. Guys, it is what it is. It's just urging caution.
Thank you for that. And now we'll go to questions from our committee members. And as I'm not quite familiar with what numbers are on our mics, I'll just call out the numbers as I see them. So we have, say your name. So mic number 9.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Chad Nimmer. Thank you, Chairman Knight. Just a couple of questions, I guess. If that's okay, Madam
Yes,
Chair. Couple,
just work through your chair.
Some may just be mechanical in nature and chronological in other, but the timing here, I noticed the date stamped on this report with questions from the Department of Interior's 2015. I noticed there's an amendment. There's actually 2 amendments laying in our folder that states that the FAA is currently conducting a study. Do you know if the this may be out of order right now. Do you know if the FAA's current impact study is a result of the Department of Interior's report to get them answers? I just
Mr.
looking
Chairman,
at 2015
yeah.
to current. I didn't know if that was.
I don't know if it's a direct. In other words, the forest, the National Park Service is what was the catalyst for the report. I don't economic study. I don't think it is. I think that economic study would have to go through and take into account not only the park but all other users, and so I'm not sure that the Park Service.
They're going to be looking more at the parks.
Yeah, they're giving you all. Yeah, they're giving you all of their concerns with Cumberland Island and the issues.
Which
All right, work for me.
Ma'am.
Another question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I can. Okay.
Yes, please.
All right. You threw me off.
I
can't blame it on
well,
traffic this
I threw
morning.
him off. We've been toying with whether or not we're geeks or nerds, and Chad has felt like we're environmental nerds because we like to study all these different things.
I didn't say that.
All right, but I've named us the Natural Resource Awesome Nerds, so the NURANs. So go ahead and have your moment.
Madam Chair, what was that?
NURANs, National Resource
Sure.
Awesome Nerds.
All right. So the Department of Interior is going to address mainly parkland. And going back to the private property rights, and I'm going to ask you the question. You may have to refer to somebody else. How long have we been? I know this has been several years, just that I can recall that we've worked on a spaceport issue. How long has this?
Chairman,
I
know that there's been somewhat study committees. Here's my concern. And, I want to reiterate to you and to the committee. I had concerns regarding how this would impact, primarily coming from a game fishing parks perspective. Last year, before last session, I went to Representative Spencer and said, how is this going to impact my hunters and fishermen on the coast? So, I really, up until that point, and there may be study committees out there or have met. That may be where you're going with your question or leading with your question. I don't know, but as chairman of the Game Fishing Parks, who has great concerns of this, I was not either invited to participate on the committee, or did I get a report back from that committee regarding its efforts, and whether I should have paid more attention to all the study committees that are going on. That's another question to be asked.
Yeah.
But as a chairman of this committee that is very protective of our great natural resources of this state, regardless, I've got concerns, and I want to make sure I always move in a manner of caution in everything I do when it comes to our great outdoors, our natural resources, and anything that affects our men and women who love those outdoors and participate in it. And no matter what the committees and the answers are to these study committees, I still don't think the questions have been answered. Okay.
Follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
The nature of my question leads to, I think, kind of the same thing. Is I'm curious if there hadn't already been some impact studies done that maybe we just don't have the results in front of us. And the reason I say that is I sit on the Atlantic Coast Fisheries Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've not seen any red lights, any concerns, anything about the spaceport on any of the reports that we get in from that commission that runs up and down the eastern seaboard. And I just wonder if the FAA, and I know they're, according to this amendment, currently conducting an extensive environmental impact study in Camden County specifically. I wonder if there's just not already a study that we could refer to and see what may be potential. And I know if you hadn't sat in, I hadn't sat in on either. And the reason I referenced Atlantic Coast Fisheries Commission, something in Camden County down in our little nook, myself or the chairman of Game Fishing Parks for the state probably should have been privy to something if there was a problem or
Well,
a specific conversation. I'm just
You're
wondering
right.
if
We probably
there's something
we
out
probably
there.
would have been privy, but I would also look at it from another way. If you look at this report from the Park Service in front of you, it's not necessarily a report that says this, this, and this. It is a report that says these are our concerns.
Yeah.
And without questions and data and answers to these questions / concerns, we don't. In other words, they're saying we don't know what the impact is. We don't know what the impact is. So I would probably bet that there hasn't
been done.
It
So
hasn't
we're
been
thinking,
done.
go back to the chronological side, the stamp on here, December 30, 2015 on this report from Department of Interior, our assumption would be that the FAA's extensive environmental impact study is an effort to get answers to the Department of Interior.
Yeah. And this report that I found was simply saying from the Park Service, if you ask or look at it, everything's in the form of questions. You know, what is, how far, what are the details? I mean, you look at it and they're asking the questions saying, these are our concerns, okay? And here's what it could impact, but without answers, without the detailed studies, without all that, we don't know exactly, you know, we don't know the answers to these concerns.
And I think, Madam Chair, one last and I'll be done.
Okay.
I promise. And I want to go back and reference, I don't want me and you to sit here and give everybody in the room the impression that we don't care about the spaceport or the economic benefits that are out there to Georgians. While we understand that, I'm intrigued by the questions from Department of Interior, more intrigued about the potential for economic development and how we protect and find that balance between everything, private property rights, our shrimp, fisheries, everything. And as we proceed with this, I wish we could make some strong language. I know it's worded in here, our sensitivity to potential investors and people that are looking into our state, while being sensitive to the questions that remain to be answered. And I don't know where that balance is, if it's tweaking a little language in this resolution or how we do it, but hey, we want you to come in, but we want to be cautious about how you come in and how we do that. You know, want to hold my hand out and feed the little animal, but I want to have a hand ready to pop him if he tries to bite.
Yeah. Well,
and how we do that, I want to. How do we become good neighbors? I guess is the end of the day. But I'm gonna quit asking questions. I know we got a big committee. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Well, at this point, normally we do in our subcommittees, our bills, and we delve into them more. We can take our resolutions up in full committee. So, and we don't have another meeting coming in after us, except for yours.
I'm upon your adjournment, Madam Chair.
So I want to
if
get
you're
your
on the Game
approval.
Fish and Parks Committee, we've got another resolution afterwards regarding cobia. So I would ask the members of that committee to stick around.
All right.
Should be
So,
quick.
so we'll go ahead then and let the committee just ask
Yeah,
the question.
absolutely.
Okay.
No, this is great.
Okay.
We need to talk about this.
Right. And we might put a couple of y'all on the first flight if things go downhill. So I'm still thinking about this. I'm joking.
Al Williams gave that seat to Jason already.
So we have about 4 more legislators asking questions. So if you'll identify yourself, it's mic number 7.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, you gave catastrophic failures, a couple of instances there. Do you know if there's ever been a catastrophic failure that impacted private property or civilian personnel, if you will? Or has it all been basically over the landscape?
Well, Chairman, great question. I'm sure there are others that can give probably more detailed. Here's what I do know, and that's what I've read and you know and gleaned from just trying to study this issue. There may be more details that I am not aware of. But typically, a spaceport launches directly over water. Okay, So what makes this unique and which probably brings some more concern to this particular area or spot for a spaceport is that it's not directly over the ocean. It's launching over Georgia's marshland, and then it's launching over Cumberland and Little Cumberland Island. So I think there's added concerns that probably in other areas the actual port or site of a launch is pretty much directly over water, so there's not land. There may be exceptions to that, but I think that is what I've read as a general rule.
Okay, and in that.
Further question? Yes.
Yes, please. One more. Just in that case, then we would not look at any use of private property as encroachment issues on the flight path. Is that?
Yeah, I think if I understand your question right, Mr. Chairman, is in other situations, if it would have been directly over the ocean, some of the questions and concerns regarding the national park, which is on by the park or the United States Department of Interior, the National Park Service, or any of the private property that is on those islands, wouldn't be in question. We still may have some issues with marsh, which is, as you know, and this committee is well aware of through its debates with the marshland, the shoreline protection, and all that. We're also charged with making sure, we know where where private property ends and where state property begins, and so those are some issues that may be unique to Georgia because of our coast and the marshes versus just directly over the ocean and a beach, and there's a lot of estuaries or marshland, our marshes are, quite frankly, probably a lot of things grow in there. It's very key to our ecosystem and our coast. So,
thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next number is number 4. Just give us your name and ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. John Corbett. Thank you, Chairman Knight. Thank you for your concern, your caution. I'm an avid hunter and fisherman as well, so I appreciate your concern. But my concern is that we might be getting the cart ahead of the horse here. If this environmental impact study comes back negative way, this project will never happen, if I understand it correctly. So I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. We might be creating a resolution for something that might not ever come to fruition.
Well, and I appreciate the thought. I know you and I have talked, Representative, about this. We talked yesterday, and we all know we think we may not know what happens or is going to happen or the chances of something happening are. But again, we have sent a good signal from this General Assembly, from the state, regarding the passage of the liability waiver. This state is very much open. That's a big, big signal to the space industry. The timing of this and the fact that it is just a House resolution simply says, okay, we are looking. We are concerned. We know that this is a very important industry. We know that its economic impact is great. But we also know that the inherent risks that are associated with something like this and its impact on the environment is great. We're just going to make sure that we're taking all things in consideration. And I guess from a point of view of being in either a position of negotiation or a position of authority deciding on something, I always want to show enthusiasm towards the potential of what could be a great thing. But on the other hand, I also want to show some caution so that when I'm dealing with whatever entity I'm, is requesting or wants to make an ask of me, that I'm not so enthusiastic or overjoyed with the potential upside that I also don't let them know that they're is a potential downside, and that I'm very well aware of that. And I want to make sure that they are, so that we come in and look at this thing truthfully through objective lenses. That's it. I think we're starting to read too much more into this resolution than really what it is, which is just urging caution.
No more. All right, thank you. And then number 8 and then number 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Debbie Buckner. In the fall of 2016, I went to Little Cumberland and I met with a number of the homeowners there, and they were very concerned about the spaceport. And they referenced this document that we have here from the Department of Interior. And they said that while they had presented their concerns, they felt like they just weren't really being heard. And they were many times criticized because many of them are part-time absentee owners, because they live somewhere else and they stay there like for 2 or 3 months at the time, or the summer or whatever. But that the restrictions would be the same for them as for Cumberland. If there was a launch, they couldn't go to their home, and they will be, Little Cumberland, the way I understand it, is under the trajectory of the rockets. So there's a potential of harm or danger to them. They are very appreciative of this resolution, but they are still have some questions and concerns about their property rights and how they fit into all of this. And so I was curious to know, of the 2 amendments, which both mention property rights, do you have are these your amendments? Do you have a preference of these amendments?
First of all, I know that Representative Spencer and I, in an effort to work with him, had looked at one amendment that actually he had wrote the language for, and I was okay. But I understand as I come in today, there's 2 amendments. I don't have that in front of me. Is this a folder that?
No, you can have mine.
I'll keep yours if this is a copy in it.
Right now we're doing testimony and questions, and then we'll hear from the audience, but it's all right. But if someone wants us to consider an amendment with our committee, they have to make us aware of who the sponsor is. So do we have sponsor of the amendment on our committee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I would like to sponsor the amendment AM 400207.
(400207). So we have a 400205 sponsor.
That's correct.
And then a 400207. So I guess, Representative Buckner, to which amendment do you wish to direct, or do you want to talk about both amendments?
Both of them address private property rights, and the only difference I see is the recognition of Georgia as a sovereign entity on line 4 of one of them and not in the other one.
Okay, so you just a general observation.
Question.
That is fine. That is fine.
Would the author, is the author supportive of the amendment, and does the author feel that the concerns of the people on Little Cumberland and their private property rights might be able to be looked at under this provision of the amendment?
All right, thank you. And then we will go back to our presenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just for the committee's clarification, I mentioned that I'd spoken with Representative Spencer yesterday. AM 400205. I'm sorry.
That's the first one.
That's 0207.
It's the second one.
Okay. Is the language that Representative Spencer actually wrote and we had talked about, and he's the one that brought me that language. So in an effort to work with Representative Spencer, I was okay with that.
With, again, Amendment 400207, which is the second amendment and the second receipt of an amendment.
Now, the one with 0205, he had mentioned yesterday, but that was, I said, no, I'm not okay with that. Georgia is just not a stakeholder on the sidelines in this, okay? This is our state. we as the General Assembly, the legislature, are not stakeholders. And that coast is not just, a private property. It's the states. We're in charge of that. And I am not okay with relegating this state is simply another stakeholder in this process. We are a sovereign entity, and no matter what a federal report says or what a local report says, this state should never give up its sovereign, as a sovereign entity, its power, its domain over this state. And quite frankly, I'm not sure why we would ever acquiesce to the feds. There's so many things that we're doing now acquiescing to the feds that I know, is not right, and that we as a state don't believe are in the best direction of our citizens. And certainly, I am not willing to put in any language relegating us as just simply another stakeholder in the process. This is Georgia land. Those marshes are Georgia's. We have domain over them.
Thank you. I think for a point of clarification for my committee, let me just check with the gentleman sponsoring the amendments and ask him which one will he be presenting to our committee, because he doesn't have to present both.
The 0207.
07, which is the one that I think that has your language in its sovereign entity. So to our committee then, let's just fold up or whatever we're going to do with 05 so we don't get confused. And Representative Buckner, thank you for that clarification. Looping back to you because you still have the mic, so thank you.
Great. Okay, so we've cleared up that we want 07 and the sovereign immunity is an important point. So does the author with this amendment feel like that with the resolution we would be able to look at some of the concerns of the private property owners on Little Cumberland?
Well,
I mean, I know you're a
the author of the resolution.
so I need to
Okay.
look at
Amendments.
this.
Okay.
But do you? Okay.
Representative Buckner, I was okay with this because I think it, unless there's some legalese in here that this non-attorney doesn't recognize, I think it, if you read this while recognizing Georgia as a sovereign entity, I think it gives pause and reiterates that this state has ultimate say-so and domain over any issue. And again, regardless of what an FAA study may be, or a local study, or a private study may be, Georgia, we as the General Assembly still have ultimate control and domain over the state. So I was comfortable with this language and had made and again, an attempt to working with Representative Spencer. He wrote it, and I said, I'm fine with it.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Representative Buckner? Does that answer your question?
That does.
All right, thank you. So let's go to number 3.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chuck Williams. Chairman Knight, thank you for bringing this forth and for reminding us of the need for balance. As we look at our discussion this morning, we've talked a lot about environmental issues, as is appropriate. We've talked about the potential environmental assessment being prepared, which is well and good. As I look at the resolution, which I co-sponsor with you, the resolution talks as much about economics as it does natural resources and environment, again, as I think it should. And I would expect that any environmental impact study will address environmental issues only. So as we also look at any potential impacts on Georgia's economy, have you got any thoughts as the primary sponsor of the resolution on how or who the potential economic impacts might be studied?
Representative, That's a great question, and again, I want to make sure the committee knows this is just urging. I'm not sure I got all the answers. My original, again, concern came from closures, looking at, closing off, state waters, how many launches, what time. I mean, you look at potential impact of just, our fishermen who planned a vacation, down there and wanted to fish. Now all of a sudden you've got, a spanse of state waters that belongs to our citizens. The resources belong to our citizens, and now all of a sudden, 6-month planning is gone to the wayside because there's a launch and there's closures. That was my primary concern, because I think there will be at least some impact economically from just a fishing coastal perspective. You bring in shrimpers, you bring in crabbers, the commercial aspect of one of the most important and traditional aspects of the coast is our seafood industry. So I think there are economic impacts. One of my concerns with the catastrophic, what if all of a sudden, a rocket launches and 400, 500 yards off into the marsh, it crashes, and, what happens? What is the closure? How long will the marshes be closed? What will be the, if there's fuel and things out there, what's going to happen? These are just questions that again, guys, I'm just trying to say, stop, think about. That's all. I can't answer your question, but I think those are things that we all need to answer. And again, I'm not educated on this industry. I've tried to do some reading on it, and I'm continuing to read and study. But again, I think there are a lot of unanswered questions to your part that we all need to take into account. It's not only our fishermen or our coastal seafood industry, shrimpers, crabbers, recreational fishermen, tourism, but we've got a lot of our ports up and down the coast. We've got bases, and again, I've heard anecdotal reports. Everybody's okay. That may be the case, and if it is, that's fine. But I want us as General Assembly to make sure that we fully understand the impacts to each and every economic sector that may be out there that could be impacted. And if it's all good, great. We bring a new industry to Georgia, and we all do well and prosper, and we just add to Georgia. What I don't want to do is make a fatal mistake.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And then circle back to Representative, the mic number 9, Chad, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, just I've got several different questions, a couple of clarification, and then a couple just for conversation, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
As you ask your questions,
Direct them through you.
yes, and then also make sure the presenters had a chance to answer, and then move to your next one. That's fine. There's no one following you, so that's fine.
Okay. All right. Madam Chair, first question is for Representative Corbett.
All
Just
right.
out of a point of clarity, I think, if I understand right, and forgive me for not knowing all the districts in Georgia, I think there's 180 of them, best I can count. You and Representative Spencer are the only two that touch Camden County. Is that correct?
Hold on just a second. Let me touch your mic. Okay, go ahead.
That is correct.
What? I think you might be
Well,
incorrect.
I'm incorrect. I'm incorrect. I'm sorry. Dover's, Bluff areas, and
Maybe I need to ask somebody else, Madam Chair. I don't know.
I don't know. Once you are in Atlanta, you can't leave Atlanta. That's what happens.
All right. My question is, I understand that you offered up this AM 400207. Did you also
05?
have the 05? No, 05 is the one we discarded.
I think that
Yeah.
was Representative Corbett's.
Yes,
You had
yes.
both amendments, yeah.
You did both of them.
both amendments.
Okay.
There's 3 of y'all in that delegation, and you took liberty to do 2. I'm messing with you now.
I'm overachiever.
Okay, but I'm just curious from a delegation standpoint. Are y'all? I'm assuming you guys, as many years as we've talked about spaceports and progress and moving forward and being cautious and getting to the point we're in, or that we have arrived at. Town hall meetings, your local governments, the residents that vote for you guys, y'all have heard from them.
Absolutely. They had
And that
meetings.
includes fishermen, recreation people, homeowners,
And
the people that are getting a leg
river
good.
keepers, 100 Mile, Satilla River keepers.
Okay, Madam Chair, may I continue? I
Yes,
got it.
yes.
Back to Chairman Knight.
So, all right, so back to Chairman Knight, all right? And your mic's on, Chairman. So,
Out of curiosity, I probably have heard this somewhere over the past few years. I ain't got a clue what the answer is. How many launches a year are we talking about? Or how many a month? Or is it?
I think
Or is it per
that's a
year?
question that is still, I say to be asked. The application, as I understand it, has up to, is it 12 or 13 a year?
Be careful. She'll get you. You better. I think she's gonna want you to recognize it.
committee only right now, okay?
Um,
So you're having, I don't know if you're having drawn in support from the audience or not, but
I'm
at
sorry?
this point in time, our debate is just for our committee members only, and then we open it up for the general
I
audience.
told him to be careful for the record. But
Madam Chair, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll get a head shake from Representative Spencer, I think the application was for, is it 12 or 13 a year?
Permit is asking for 12 a year.
Okay.
Up to 12.
ha-
So that's what the permit is asking for.
further question, Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Chairman, if the permit's up to 12 a year, I'm curious how much notice, because Representative Butler and I are talking about residents on Little Cumberland specifically. How much notice do they get before a launch is going to take place? So they know that, hey, I need to go to a movie this afternoon and not try to go to the house or whatever the inconvenience may be.
Those are the things that I don't understand, and has been probably one of my primary concerns is closure. And you know, as I understand it, and Representative Spencer has come and given me some overview. You know, you've got wet tests, or I guess just where they dry fired or whatever, because obviously we saw one of those where they dry fired and it didn't work. But so you've got closures in several of these procedures. And again, I'm not an expert at this technology or the industry and what are the procedures, but there are certain closures before each, and I don't know how far out. Obviously, there's a closure to test. We saw one of the videos was a test. That one that blew up on the launcher was just a test. They were just, I guess, revving things up or whatever they do to do a mock, whatever, dry fire, if you will, a wet test. So they're closures. Now that closure may only say a mile out. I don't know. I don't know all the details.
Okay.
But then you may have the actual launch, and it could be up to 7 miles, or you know, I know in some of the maps I had given, there's actually closures. You know, my concerns are there are delays, or weather delays, there are technical delays. So, you know, is that closure maybe an anticipated closure if everything goes well of 2 hours, or if there's a weather delay or a storm that, as y'all all know, will happen at any time on the coast? Does it delay it for 2 hours? Maybe that closure lasts all day. Or if there's a catastrophic event, does it close it for days or weeks? I don't know. Again, guys, we're getting into some details that I think illustrates the reason of why I'm coming with this resolution. This committee is asking these questions, okay? This committee is asking these questions, but yet I've heard that we've done studies and have had study committees and all. But if this committee is still asking those questions, it tells me that we haven't got all the answers, because I can't give you that. And that's what I'm looking for, Chairman Nimmer, is exactly what you're talking about here, so that we can make informed decisions. So if all of a sudden we have something that closes, you know, this part of the sound and the island for 10 hours, we need to know that. And we need to know, because it's not the spaceport that's going to get the calls. It's going to be you and I that are going to get the calls that said, I planned a vacation down there. I spent X number of dollars, and my whole plan was interrupted. Or I had a wedding, on Cumberland at the end, and it was planned 6 months in advance, and now there's a launch.
Be one to remember.
Yeah, I mean, but look, guys, I'm just saying caution. And if these questions can't be if they haven't been answered now, that is the purpose of what this does, is simply say caution. Let's make sure we know all the answers. That's it.
I think, Madam Chair, and I'll end here because I'm really torn on the resolution. And I've got, out of great respect for Chairman Knight and the caution that we approach our wildlife and our natural resources and the way this committee approaches things. I have another concern of caution that there's currently studies being done that while we may not have looked for some of the previous studies done and we don't have some of the answers, maybe we just haven't triggered our minds to ask the questions. Sometimes we assume things are done, but we know that the FAA is doing an environmental impact study on private property rights to fisheries and everything, and we're recognizing Georgia and its sovereignty in that study. My caution that I'm torn between is not only the impact that is potentially coming or could happen, but also us going down a road of do we start passing resolutions to study the impact of every potential business coming to Georgia? And that is a real concern. I mean, we talk about slippery slopes around here, and we talk about things that could lead to other things. However, in that caution, I remind myself that we're talking about rockets going to space. That's not manufacturing bulldozer tracks up in LaGrange or something. This is totally different. So I'm really torn. I get where you're going, but I'm not so sure the FAA isn't already down the road, and I fear that if we pass a resolution, we may send a bad signal or set a precedence of how we move forward. But then, on the other hand, if we don't pass the resolution, do we ever really get the answers that we're looking for? And so, I mean, man, you talk about straddling a fence. This is, I mean, what do you do, Madam Chair? Lead us here.
What your Madam Chair does is every person in this room who serves on this committee has a right to make up their own mind. It's up to our members to vote whichever way they feel as we get into that process. So we'll just go through the voting process at the proper time. So, and then one mic is not working. So, Representative, will you ask are you through? Okay. All right.
Oh, no, ma'am, but.
All right. Go ahead and say your name.
I'm Sherry Gilligan. I'm from Forsyth County, Cumming, Georgia. I'm not near the area, but I used to work with rocket scientists in my former life. So, yeah, I love this kind of stuff. I'm a little bit of a geek, not a nerd. We've already had that discussion. But from my experience, the areas that do a lot of the testing, they're testing different kinds of fuels, different kinds of rockets. They're not necessarily at your launch pads. They are at different kinds of space centers. So that's something that we may not even see in Camden, the one explosion that happened. We're not real sure. So that's one thing. When we're limiting our permit to 12 launches a year, I would expect that Camden would think about very seriously only limiting it to launches and not to testing of new prototype rockets or new types of fuel. That's my expectation, just understanding a little bit of the business. Also, whenever a launch is scheduled, the closure area of launches tend to be in a conical shape because they know that they're going to go this particular direction. They have error built into that, but it's a conical shape. It's not the entire target that is drawn up there. Launches also, they do have very finite windows. When I am launching a platform into space, I have a very small window in order to hit whatever my target is. From shooting, if you shoot something close by, you can be off at a wider margin and still hit your target, but you have that same variation at a mile off, you're never going to get there, and imagine the distance of space. So your timing is everything, because your timing is your angle, the rotation of the Earth. So the closure would not be an all-day closure, because there's no way I can miss my window, think I can get it in 10 hours, and be where I want to be in space, because now I'm somewhere other. So I just wanted to address some of the questions that were kind of asked. I would love at any time to have lunch with y'all and talk about how exciting this exact program could be. I obviously am a proponent of the space program. Now, having said all of that, I absolutely want to make sure that we're not going to hurt our marshlands. I absolutely want to make sure that the property rights are protected. I absolutely want to make sure that our economic engine is not hurt but helped by this. And there is a balance, because what can be gained from the spaceport and what could be lost to shrimping and fishing, I get it. We do have to find that balance. But I haven't made up my mind in all of this. I did have one question, though, after my big loud mouth.
To the bill's presenter?
Yes, to the presenter. Okay, so we have this from the Southeast NPS, right? National. This is the thing dated December 30th, and now I don't have my eyeballs on. Okay, so December 2015, and it's from the Southeast Regional Office. So when we look at the Southeast Regional Office, that covers Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, and Kentucky. Of those, Florida already has launch, space pad. We kind of heard of that one. Alabama is applying for one. Florida is applying for more locations. Oh, I'm curious, did this office then submit the same kinds of questions to Alabama, and do we have anything on that? Did they offer the same kinds of questions to Florida at their new locations, and do we have anything on that? Or was this uniquely drawn for Georgia and they didn't do it? I'm just curious if Camden is, because it's marshland or something, was it so unique that they needed to do something above and beyond what they would do for any of the other states that were applying? And I was just curious.
All right. First of all,
Thank you.
Representative Gilligan, back to before your question about this, back to your last few words about the balance, about the great potential, but yet making absolutely sure that we're not harming what we already have. That was, I couldn't say it any more concisely or better. Okay? That's exactly what I'm trying to do here, is put some balance. Because so far, it's been, all guns on deck. We're going. We need to make sure that we're not stepping out and they're firing back at us first. And that's all I'm saying is caution. Poke your head up. Make sure it's clear to go on deck. Okay? But you said it very eloquently, and I appreciate that. That is my sentiment, is great potential. We know there's risk in everything, but we need to weigh those risks. And we need to weigh, because this is unique to Georgia, and our Golden Isles, Berry Islands, they call them Berry Islands for a reason. But on to your question about the Park Service and the letter, the Southeastern letter. With absolute detail, I cannot answer you. But I would tend, after reading this report, because of the fact that that Cumberland Island, in other words, it's a national park, that there is a uniqueness to this particular site because of the park being here and the fact that rocket is launching over the park. Okay? So I can't say and with 100% certainty that that's the only thing that makes this unique. There could be other things, and I don't know, but certainly I'm not sure of the other locations. But if they're tending to go over water or whatever, there's probably less of a chance that they've got a national park that is coming into play as far as the uniqueness of Cumberland Island and the national park there. So I think that's probably adds to, I guess, the complication of this site. Okay.
Thank you. And just to let our chairman know that it's about 10 after 10 now. If we have your committee waiting outside,
yeah.
and we've sent word to them that we're still in our meeting.
And I'll let my young aide go tell them, wait. Please go tell them to wait.
We're not ready to launch
Yeah.
yet.
Yeah, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not ready to launch yet.
So, what I'll do now, I have. So we're in the posture of hearing from the public first, but you have a question, Representative.
Just a comment. I think the national parks at Kennedy and Wallops Island in Virginia as well. I believe they're national parks as well.
Thank you. Now, we have 3 people signed up to speak, and so we'll go in order in which they signed up. Representative Spencer is first, and keep your comments brief as possible, although you're the one that's you're in ground zero. He's on the first flight. Yeah.
Well, if the committee, if the chair would allow, I would like to show a video, since we're showing videos.
Yes, go ahead.
Maybe your aide can assist me in sort of this.
Maybe not. We haven't tested him on this one
Okay.
yet. So
Let's see here. This might be a. Here's the. Here's the video. I'd like to show. Is the audio connected?
only women get to ask that question. I did.
Okay.
So how long is the video?
It's about 3 minutes.
Okay, that's fine.
Is there audio to that?
There is, should be. Full screen.
All right, it's on. The horses are leaving.
Well, I think he's going to try to work on the audio here. All right. You want to try it now?
Might as well try.
Okay.
Or we don't have audio, huh?
Okay.
Well, I'll just narrate through this video as you can. What this video is an AP video regarding Wallops Island, Virginia. As you can see in the background, this is a beach. This is an island. There are horses there at Wallops Island, Virginia, very much similar to Cumberland Island. So we have very much similar features. As you can see, the rocket there go off into space, and they're talking about the space station, and they're also talking about the tourism impact at Wallops Island, Virginia. If some of you remember yesterday, I put on your desk the tourism dollars impact on Wallops Island, Virginia was about $145 million annually because of that. And here this lady is with the local Chamber of Commerce, and she is actually stating how much this project there in Wallops Island, Virginia is bringing tourism dollars to that community. A coastal community, a small coastal community, much like the community I represent in Camden County. And so that is what this video is essentially saying. Again, we've got a hotel owner there at Wallops Island, Virginia, and very much happy about the tourism and the dollars that it's bringing into the area. So as you can see, there are very much similar environmental situations there at Cumberland Island and at Virginia. This is a national park there, much like Cumberland Island, and so we're not doing anything really new. And so I wanted to really speak to the resolution so that you guys know exactly what we're doing, and why I feel like the current resolution at this time, in terms of timing, is unnecessary. I think lines 12 through 14 has already been discussed, and I did offer that amendment as a way to continue to work this process with Chairman Knight. I think he was really more concerned about the sovereignty of the state, and so I tried to put the essence of that language into that amendment, and you're not going to find a stronger 10th Amendment warrior than me. And so I get that, and I'm sympathetic to that argument. And so the impact a Georgia spaceport will have on Georgia's ports and its commercial fishing and shrimping industry, its creation and tourism industries, and the private property rights of Georgia citizens has been studied extensively and is being studied currently right now with the environmental impact study that's been commissioned by the Camden County Commissioners. They paid $700,000 to ask the FAA to look at this project. This is their money. They didn't come to the state asking for any money. This is the money that we, the taxpayers of Camden County, put forward because we see the potential in this investment. And this is the study right here at the FAA. You can go to the FAA's Office of Commercial Space and download this document. And it talks about all these concerns, and the document that you're referencing there on the National Park Service was part of this scoping process. The point of a scoping process is to get the public input from all stakeholders, and even stakeholders who are sovereign entities like the state of Georgia, okay? And so before Camden County can even apply for the FAA for a launch site operator's license, it must undergo a thorough environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act. That is a federal law. And so this is not a rubber stamp procedure. This is a very rigorous process. We started this we're going over 18 months now when we first started this. The NEPA requires that the environmental impact statement for Spaceport Camden studies the effects of the proposed site. That's air quality, biological resources, including fish, wildlife, and plants, climate, publicly owned parks, recreational areas, wildlife, waterfowl, refugees, of public and private historical sites, coastal resources, farmlands, historical, architectural, archaeological and cultural resources, natural resources and energy supply, noise and compatibility, land use, socioeconomics, environmental justice, and children's health and safety risk, visual effects, including light emissions, water resources, including wetlands, floodplains, surface waters, groundwater, and wild and scenic rivers. This environmental impact study process includes multiple opportunities for the public in Camden County have gone above and beyond what was required to make sure all voices have been heard. In order to ensure that the FAA understood all possible environmental and natural resources concerned related to this project, Camden County proactively developed an environmental issues subcommittee of the Spaceport Camden Steering Committee. The subcommittee was chaired by Camden County resident Dr. Clay Montague. And some of you are familiar with him. He's a 36-year professor of environmental science at the University of Florida and an active member of the Southeast Natural Resources community. Dr. Montague's subcommittee solicited input from every major environmental organization in Southeast Georgia. In addition, Dr. Montague and the members of the subcommittee included David Ball. He was a Cumberland Island property owner and resident of Statesboro. Ben Carswell, Jekyll Island Authority and resident of Jekyll Island. Megan Darcieres, the executive director of 100 Miles Group. Alex Kearns, executive director of the St. Mary's Earthkeepers. Philip Fortune, lawyer and resident of St. Simon's Island. Charles McMillan, coastal director of the Georgia Conservancy. Russell Regenery, property owner, Little Cumberland Island, director of the Sea Turtle Project. Mark Reese, director of UGA Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. Ashby Nick Swirly, then was the Satilla River Keeper and Executive Director of Satilla River Watch Alliance Incorporated. With all this said, Dr. Montague's subcommittee presented over 402 questions to the FAA's consideration and its environmental impact. These questions included launch safety and inconvenience, such as direction and launch trajectories, experimental nature of vertical landings, dangerous payloads, financial responsibility and liability, effects on tourism and spectator management, consequences of refusing to leave an exclusion zone, hazardous waste and fire, existing and future, fate of historic and archaeological resources, closure of popular fishing and hunting areas, public use of the site, spaceport lighting, damage to wetlands. I could go on. There are many, many questions that were addressed in this, and I believe after we are going now on 24 hours of hearings total, this committee hearing is probably the 15th committee hearing to assess this project and its impact. So this General Assembly has spent a lot of time on this process. There may be other questions that may not be answered as of yet because the current environmental impact study is ongoing as we speak. We expect to get a draft report between April and August. That will be the first draft. And in that first draft, there will be things that we'll have to mitigate, and we're not sure what those will be, but that's the purpose of the study. And so the reason why this FAA environmental impact study has to happen is because that's what has to happen in order to get a permit. And so the reason why the FAA is driving this ship, if you will, is that airspace is the jurisdiction of the United States government for obvious reasons. And so the FAA has to drive this ship. And so I think after passage of HB 1 and the Senate has passed it, the companion bill in SB 46, you need to know that Vector Space Systems, which is a space company, has sent a letter to Governor Deal and congratulating the state on its support for the Georgia Spaceflight Act. Vector is a launch company focused on small satellites, not space tourism, but that doesn't mean space tourism would not come to Georgia. But their interest is in Georgia's legislative activities related to space showcases how much the industry watches these debates. Passage of H.R. 643 will send mixed messages to companies like Vector, and in the competitive space industry, that could cost Georgia economic development and opportunity. And so I'll stand for any questions, Madam Chair, but I just wanted to let you guys know that this process is extremely rigorous. You can go to the website, download these documents. There is another opportunity for public comment as this environmental impact process unveils. When they release that draft, there will be another period for public comment. And I would welcome Chairman Knight to write a letter to this to the environmental impact study who's doing the FAA, so that his comments can be on public record. I have written several letters. Many of the members of the General Assembly have written their own personal letters and submit them for public comment in support of the project. And so every stone at this point is being and is going to be turned over. Let's put it that way. And so the due diligence process in this matter is rigorous. We are going through that process right now. And I agree that we should be cautious. We should be worried about those property rights. And that's why we're doing what we're doing.
Thank you. In the interest of time and for Chairman Knight's committee, we still have a couple more comments from the audience. So, okay, all right. Just want to be sure. So our next, thank you for your presentation. Our next person has wants to speak to our committee. Yes. Uh-huh.
But I had a question for
Oh,
Spencer.
okay. Come back.
I apologize, Madam Chair.
All
I
right.
just assumed my button was mashed.
All right. Go. You're on.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Spencer. Back up. The 403 questions submitted by that group led by Dr. Clay, and you listed a hit list of both conservationists, environmentalists, and private property owners. They submitted those questions to the FAA, to this group that we're referencing in this amendment that Representative Corbett offered.
That is correct.
And along with this report that the United States Department of Interior, that they're addressing the questions and concern in there as well.
That is part of this scoping process. That's where that report came from.
Madam Chair, do you have any knowledge or anticipation of when FAA will present their findings? 403 questions are a lot.
Yes, they are.
We talking by the end of the year?
The draft study will be published between April and August of this year.
Okay, pretty quick. And you probably said it and I missed it. And one last question, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Because one thing, Representative Butler and I were sitting here on some of our questions with Chairman Knight. The only one I do not have marked off was where was the leadership of Camden County on this issue. But I think I heard you say that the leadership of Camden County, that being the local government body, ponied up $700,000. So they had to pay the FAA to conduct this study.
When you are asking to launch rockets up into space, you have to get permission from the FAA.
Sure.
And in order to do that, you got to have a facility, a qualified facility. And in order to be actually permitted to do so, you have to go through the FAA. And what they require is an environmental impact statement as part of the licensing process. So in order to do that, the county had to pay for that. And so what happens is the FAA bids that process out to companies. The company that the FAA bidded that out, that won that bid, is Leidos. That's the company that's running the environmental impact study. And I would also add the county has also passed a $5 million bond in the event that other costs, mitigating costs, what may have to be done in order to continue to improve that property, which is currently a brownfield site that is not being used. It's an abandoned industrial site where in 1965 NASA tested the first or the strongest rocket engine of the Saturn V rocket at that site, and we still have the silos in the ground.
And this group that Dr. Clay has, this wasn't a response to an outcry of anger or fear. This was a part of the process from Camden County, everybody working together through the entire
That is
process.
correct. The Camden County Commissioners recognized that this was a project of significant public interest, and there were parties locally that had concerns about environmental impact. And as part of the due diligence process, they formed this subcommittee headed by Dr. Montague and all these stakeholders involved.
Yes, go
My-
ahead.
Actually, a question for you.
Okay.
I know that we have been in here now for an hour and a half, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe I heard you say you had somebody else.
There are two
sign
more
up.
people who've signed up to speak, yes.
But given the nature of this and just from my perspective, I'm still torn on this issue, going back into listening to what the locals have done, understanding the concern of Chairman Knight and all that's involved. At the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion when you would recognize me for it on this resolution. Now, I don't know if that's now or if you want to hear from the other presenters first.
I think as a courtesy, we should hear from our other people
Okay.
who've come up here to speak, and then we'll have the issue back in the body of our committee, and that would be the proper time to
Okay.
make your motion. So, thank you. Representative Jones, mental telepathy to you. I should have said your name, sorry.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for conducting this hearing, and Chairman Knight for bringing this issue before this committee. My name is Jeff Jones. I represent District 167, parts of Glenn County, which is a coastal county, and McIntosh County, also a coastal county. I perhaps have certainly not the depth and breadth of knowledge as the author of this bill, Representative Spencer, but I have testified previously in support of this effort over the last couple of years. And I think this committee also is fully aware of, I served on this committee for 2 years. This committee is also fully aware of my continued interest and concerns about Georgia properly managing its environmental resources, and that we do so in a positive, respectful manner of our citizens and of our state's natural resources. That is an obligation not only of this committee, but I would submit of the entire General Assembly. So I mention those things just to, as I make my comments very briefly, because I know we're way over time here. It seems to me that given all of the extensive studies that are currently in process and have been in process for some time, and whose conclusions have yet to be presented to the public, these 400 plus questions, public hearings and such, that this, in respect to Chairman Knight, it would seem to me that this resolution is perhaps ill-timed in that it very likely and perhaps sends the wrong message to those who are stakeholders in this whole process of a spaceport in Georgia, that we may be sending the message that the fact that the General Assembly has passed 2 versions of bills in support of this, that we may be sending the message that, well, we really don't support this and we want to draw back from the apparent support that we've given thus far. So it seems, again, as I said, to repeat myself, that this resolution is perhaps ill-timed and might be best served to be tabled for discussion next year. But at minimum, again, in respect to Chairman Knight, it seems that the resolution fails to take in, as presented, not to include the amendment, but that the resolution as presented fails to take into consideration all of the extensive hours and weeks and months and lists of questions that are currently being conducted. So at minimum, I would think if this resolution were to be passed out of this committee, that it should certainly include the amendment 0207, which does by its very statement recognize that the FAA is conducting this extensive study and makes it very clear that Georgia has sovereignty in this issue. Regardless of the results of the FAA study, the state of Georgia and Camden County still has every right and obligation to analyze, conduct studies, public hearings, et cetera, on the results of the studies and the answers to those questions as they come forth. So, again, in my thinking, best would be to table this amendment for next year. Let us see what the FAA study presents, and if at that time it's appropriate for this committee to delve further into the environmental impact of this project, then certainly to do so. And I want to close with this. I believe it entirely appropriate that this committee stick its nose into this issue. And I mean that a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but this is where this issue lies in terms of the environmental impact to the state is with this committee. So I support this committee's efforts. And again, thank Chairman Knight for bringing the resolution. But again, I would implore this committee to consider perhaps tabling this until we get those FAA results.
Thank you. I see we have one question.
Thank
Yes.
you, Madam Chair. Debbie Buckner.
Yes.
To my friend, do you, looking at the resolution and hearing what you're saying and valuing it greatly, do you not see that the resolution might be seen as we are supportive of all the studies that are going on and that we are just collaborating, that we want those studies to be done accurately and thoroughly? Because based on what I think the 402 questions might be, I got a feeling some of those questions deal with the same things outlined in this resolution.
I agree that I would anticipate that the questions that come out and the subsequent public hearings after the results of those studies and the questions are answered, that's going to prompt further debate and discussion, absolutely. So again, if this amendment were to go forward, I would think it must include Amendment 0207 to make it clear that this committee recognizes and that the General Assembly recognizes that an extensive study process is in place. As presented, it appears to me that the amendment does not recognize that fact and almost seems to suggest that the General Assembly has proceeded with supporting this project by its passing of these bills, that we don't recognize the fact that there's extensive studies going on. So
With the
amendment, I'm certainly personally much more comfortable with the resolution, but still don't know that it's really necessary at this stage in this evaluative process.
Thank you.
Thank
Did
you.
that answer your question in a long-winded way?
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. We have one other person who signed up to comment, John Simpson. Mr. Simpson?
Thank you. My name is John Simpson. I am a consultant for Camden County. Steve Howard, who is the county administrator, would have liked to be here today, but he is with some high school students talking about STEM education, which happens to be one of the great benefits of this project, is getting kids in coastal Georgia interested in science, technology, mathematics, etc. So he asked me to speak on behalf of the county. I just want to clarify a couple of things that have been discussed today. And the very first is the Department of Interior report that folks have brought out. The way this application process works, as Representative Spencer mentioned, is you have what's known as the very first thing is known as a scoping summary. A scoping report. And the scoping report is to ask everybody in the community, everybody that could possibly be interested in this project, what are your concerns? That includes federal agencies, it includes state government, it includes the general public. The report that you have from the Department of Interior is the National Park Service's questions, and there's a reason why they're all questions, and asking the FAA, when you do your environmental impact statement, please look at these very specific questions. So that's a very normal part of the process. It was not anything that was unexpected. Folks have asked, would they do this in other places? Absolutely. Every agency has the opportunity and the right to comment when another agency is doing an environmental impact statement. I wanted to also talk about when we saw some video or pictures of catastrophic failures. And I want to talk about that very quickly because there was a lot of misconceptions about failures in general, catastrophic failures. One of the things that we talked about was launch windows. And for a lot of missions, especially when you're trying to go to the International Space Station, for instance, you have what's called an instantaneous launch window, which means if you don't take off at the exact right second, you're never going to catch the space station. So there are missions that are classified as failures that never had anything to do with an actual safety concern. It maybe took off 3 seconds late, and it was in the wrong orbit. And sometimes that's correctable. It takes a lot of fuel, but sometimes you can correct that. Other times it may not be correctable. You might have one engine fail out of the 9 on, say, for example, a Falcon 9 rocket. 8 of them work perfectly. The vehicle gets into orbit, but it's just not where it's supposed to be. That's a failure, but it's not a safety concern. So Camden County went through every available rocket launcher, which are in Camden County, we're only planning on launching liquid-fueled rockets because they are safer rockets than solid-fueled rockets, and looked at the launch success rate for safety, excluding any of those failures that aren't really safety failures. And the current launcher fleet has a 99% success rate. Now, if you want to talk about the number of launches in Camden County that Camden County expects and what's the chance of injury or any sort of property damage, things like that, to the uninvolved public. The FAA actually, once we get through this whole EIS process, will do another calculation. That will be when the FAA runs the numbers and determines how safe is Spaceport Camden. If a launch in Camden County is expected to cause 1 casualty, which is defined as an injury or death to the uninvolved public, in 500 years, the license is denied. So that's how rigorous this review is. The FAA has never had a has never had a casualty related to the uninvolved public in commercial spaceflight. Camden County certainly does not want to be the first, and it will do everything possible to make sure that it complies with all of the FAA's regulations on that. So to get back to where we are in the process, all of the questions, the 402 that Dr. Montague sent, the questions that the Department of Interior sent, that's all part of the whole scoping report. The FAA receives those from everybody. They look at them all and they say, let's review every possible environmental question. At some point, and that's when we should get a draft EIS, we'll get an answer to all of those questions. And the FAA will say, here's all the concerns that we still have, and here's the mitigation we think that you should do to fix that. There's another comment period, in which point the state of Georgia, the General Assembly, House of Representatives can all comment on that and say we're not satisfied yet. There's an opportunity for a public comment, and that should come in either somewhere between April and August. And then there will be a final environmental impact statement. We expect that at the end of the year. After all that's done, we still have to apply to the FAA again for our launch site operator's license. And that's when we'll go through the casualty statistics, all of the potential dangers. So there's a second review on top of that. The last thing I wanted to mention is closures. We talked a lot about property rights today. Closures are not expected to impact property owners. The reason for that is because when you do a launch, you have a exclusion zone. And the exclusion zone says authorized persons are not allowed in this exclusion zone. Homeowners are authorized persons. So if they want to stay in their home during a rocket launch, they can stay in their home during a rocket launch. So the discussion about property rights really is sort of a phantom discussion at this point until the FAA tells us otherwise. So I'm happy to answer any questions about what's been discussed. I did want to offer, there was a lot of things that folks talked about today that they didn't know the questions to. We have an aerospace consultant, a rocket scientist, who will come in and answer any questions that anyone has about launch safety in general. We also have an environmental protection specialist, a NEPA specialist that is helping, previously has reviewed these environmental impact statements. We're willing to have them come into the General Assembly, answer any of the questions, and you know, if there's a briefing that we can do, please let us know.
Thank you. I believe you have one question, Representative Corbett. Is that you?
He borrowed my mic, but I've got one.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right.
Am I good?
Yes, you're good.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony. Got a specific question for you on the National Park Service Department of Interior document that we've referred to several times today, and we've talked about, that this resolution would be deemed somewhat negative in nature or whatnot. The next to the last paragraph of the National Park Service document, the last sentence of that paragraph says, "Therefore, we strongly recommend the consideration of other alternative site locations." That sounds pretty definitive and pretty negative to me coming from the National Park Service. Can you address that statement?
Sure. When you do an environmental impact statement, what you're really asking is this the spot we should do it, or are there alternatives? And if there are no alternative spots, what are the mitigation factors for that can take place to assuage those concerns, if you will? So you're absolutely right. The National Park Service listed out all of its concerns. In its agency's goals are to protect. It's only focused on one issue, and that's national parks. The FAA has the obligation, obviously, to look at every possible, as the one conducting this environmental impact statement, every possible concern. But so when you that specific paragraph that you address basically is a standard closing paragraph that says we don't think this is the right site. That's a legitimate concern from the National Park Service, but it does not mean that that's the view of the federal government. Does not mean that's the view of any extensive study.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. And so number 4B has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it not true that the FAA has certified over 300 commercial flights since 1989, and there never has been a risk to the public?
That's correct. There's never been an injury to the uninvolved public. The one thing I wanted to leave you with is that this resolution essentially has two clauses, two therefore clauses. One is that we need to study this issue. I think that what you've heard today is that everything in addressing that concern is being studied, and there is opportunity certainly for sovereignty of Georgia to influence that. We'd welcome that. The second is to make this resolution publicly available. And that's where we really need to actually focus, because the first issue is addressed. There are lots of public comment. The second is the message that we're going to send, and that's where we have
to clarify. The committee's looking at me for clarification. We're talking lines 22 to 24. It's on the second page, the back of the sheet. Okay, go ahead.
So, and that's where we really need to be concerned, because I think everybody here is for study and for making sure this is the most inclusive process possible to ensure the safety of our coast and protection of our natural resources. That's ongoing. We want to work with the committee to educate them, to provide, let you know when there's opportunities to provide input. But the last piece is what is really concerning, because it essentially says, let's make sure everybody knows about this resolution. And that's what's going to send the wrong message to the space industry. We just sent them a strong message that said, you're welcome here in Georgia, and then we're saying, but wait. And so, to the extent that we're concerned about what we're seeing in economic development, I would be very concerned about that as well. So.
Thank you. And our bill presenter thank you, sir. And our bill presenter has the last chance to summarize his statements on the bill.
Been around here for about 13 years now, and you'll hear this often. Go back to what's on the paper. All this says is that we need to make sure we understand the impact, good or bad. It recognizes that there's good in the spaceport, and it does nothing more than that. You've heard testimony trying to deflect that we're already answering these questions. Well, we are. But I want to make sure that the General Assembly is well aware of what's going on here, and that we need to make sure that we are well aware of what the questions are, or if we've even got more questions. Some of us still have questions that may not be. I haven't even seen the 402 questions that were submitted. I would tell you that while I have a lot of faith in the federal government, I don't have that much faith. And this resolution makes sure that we're saying that Georgia will understand what's going on. And then the last statement you heard about was, this is to make sure that everybody understands, or it's out for media, the resolution. Well, you know something? I'm not sure there's anything we do at the General Assembly that is not public. Any bill or resolution we have is out there. So whether you got this language or not, okay, I can go call a press conference. You can go call a press conference, as many of y'all have done on your own. Quite frankly, I want to make sure that every Georgia citizen is aware of this, and that they're up to date and they're up to speed. Because quite frankly, I think you've got a lot of support in Georgia for this spaceport. And I'll repeat that. I think you've got a lot of support in Georgia for this spaceport. But my very nature of my profession as a CPA, and then just my love, my great love and passion for Georgia's outdoors and our hunting and fishing and our natural resources, all I'm doing here is saying, just understand what's going on. That's it. There's nothing more to this than what's on this sheet of paper. I've worked with the author. He wrote up the language the other day as far as the amendment that has been spoken to. I'm okay with it. It recognizes that the FAA is currently doing this study. That's all this is. And I'd urge the body to take this into consideration, because the last thing we need to do is be so gung-ho to go jump into something and not show any caution that should a negative happen and somebody comes back to us and say, well, why didn't you think of this, or why didn't you look at this? That's all this resolution does. I'd ask for the committee to favorably consider the resolution, and as the author of the resolution, I would say that I am in support of and ask that you pass the amendment AM 400207. And I appreciate the committee's time on this. This is a very important matter, and I know it's split down both ways, but it is about balance. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We have the issue back within our committee, and Representative Nimmer has given me notice that he wishes to make a motion. This is the proper time, unless there are other. Okay. Wait, was there a question? What number are you? Okay.
Having trouble.
Uh-huh.
Jan Tankersley. Could I make a comment, Madam Chair?
Yeah. Yes.
I do think that this is a really good resolution. I think it would offer, with the amendment, and I think it would offer the citizens that we serve in Georgia some reassurance that we're not going to disconnect just because we're waiting on all these studies to be answered, that we can indeed stay involved and aware of what's the results of all these studies that are important to all of Georgia, not just the coast.
Thank you. All right, it's the proper time. Your mic number, I should know this is 9. Wait, who's 7? Who's 7? Okay, all right.
Can you turn it off?
There, you're off. Okay, 9. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I make my motion, I'll just a comment. I think we're all concerned about the same things here, from the author of the resolution, Chairman Knight, to the author of the original spaceport measure, Spencer, the presenter of the amendment, Corbett, and to Chairwoman Tankersley's point just then, I think we're all concerned about the same things here. But Chairman Knight brings up the point of balance, and I fear that we're going to get out of balance one way or the other if we're not very careful on how we handle this today. Now, I'm preferencing that with what my motion is going to be. I'm going to move a motion that we table with with an exception. And I was consulting with my seatmate over here whether or not this would be appropriate. We agreed that if it was out of order, you would let me know pretty quick. But I want to move that we table this with the exception that we make sure that we get this report from FAA and we see what those 402 questions are, 403, whatever were answered, how they were answered, how Department of Interior was addressed, and that we give consideration to the $700,000 investment from the taxpayers of the coastal region that have been pushing this issue. They put their money up to get this study done. I think out of consideration for that and trying to find that balance that we table this issue, we get that report, and then the chairman of Game Fish and Parks that happens to be the author of this resolution, and the chair of Natural Resources, and this is where I may be out of order, Madam Chair, that these are the two committees in which this issue lies. That y'all review, distribute the results of this FAA report that could come out within as soon as a month or two from what I'm understanding. And we take a few months to review it, explore our own convictions in our minds, both from the natural resource, game and fish aspect and the Georgia's investment and economic potential here, and that we find that balance in our heart and our own conviction. And we submit questions back if there are some, and then work with the chairman to maybe change some language, explore some new avenues that we need to have answered. There may be some things that aren't answered that we need to add into this resolution. I just don't know. I just think at this time, Madam Chair, my motion is to table, and I know I'm giving you a long explanation why, but it's because this isn't an easy one to table or move forward or discard. Because of the balance that Chairman Knight has brought to our attention. And I think where we are, we need to look at the FAA report. We need to give that next open comment period for the public an opportunity to happen, see what they're saying, see what Ground Zero's saying, what they want to have answered. And then this governing body and the Game Fish and Parks governing body look at those questions and, again, go back to our own convictions and see if there's something we need to do differently. We're only talking about a matter of months here from the time that report is submitted, we get it, and that we're back here. Unfortunately, as soon as we're about to sign a die, we'll be ready to reconvene. It seems like it goes pretty quick now. So my motion is to table with all that in it.
So in the process of just following the rules of order, a motion to table has no debate. It requires a second. There is a second to your table with benefits is the only way I know how to describe this. I will say that I think there is interest in the committee. So as chair, after this vote is taken and whatever other processes we follow with rules of order, then I can make some comments after that. And
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
No, that's fine. You have a motion to table,
yes,
and we
ma'am.
have a second. There is no debate. So you understand if you vote to table, this goes to the table, but then we would need another vote to take it off the table at a later point in time. So essentially the bill is alive. It is just resting. It's in a posture of resting. So we have a motion. Yes.
If we vote to take it back off the table, which I assume we will, we can't amend it, right? That doesn't affect
The bill is
ability
still alive,
to
and
amend.
it
Okay.
is. All right.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry.
so that was kind of a motion to table with no debate, but another debate, no debate question with benefits. So anyway, so we have a motion to table, and we have a second. So I'm now calling for the vote. All those who wish to table this Senate Resolution 643, vote aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. I'm not sure. I need to see a show of hands. So let's do a show of hands. All those in favor of tabling this resolution, raise your hands, please. How many? 8. Those opposed to tabling? So, my analyst had 8 to table and 5 not to table. So the motion to table has carried. That means this committee is now adjourned, but as chair, the first person I'm putting on this research into this issue, y'all help me with who I should put on there. Is somebody named Representative Chad Nimmer. And then I'm going to also, I think, ask Representative Gilligan to but just pay attention. I'll have to give this some thought. I want to consult with our Game Fish and Parks person and see what we can do. And it is very proper for the General Assembly to track this issue. So thank you, Chairman, for your resolution. We stand adjourned.